Fred Flintstone steak or a caveman steak, and we had a customer request it. So I have to go watch this YouTube video to see exactly what that is, because that's not like a standard name, right?
The Fred Flintstone steak.
And what it ended up being was like, you take the entire hind quarter of the animal and you separate out the loin, and then you've got your sirloin and your tri-tip, and everything is all still intact on the rump. And then you take that off of the rail. So this is like a 100-pound piece of leg or better. And you run that across the bandsaw as one giant, huge, massive steak, right? With a bunch of bones in it and weird stuff.
Elliot, how are you, sir?
Good. How are you today?
Good, man. Listen, I am a huge fan of meats, whole animals. My friend and I, Max, and again, to introduce you, you are Northwest Premium Meats. You're a meat processor. You deal with whole animals. You're not dealing with things out of a box. I love whole animals. I have a pig roasting oven that I made. So Michael Pollan, the ag critic and journalist, I actually worked with his son for SAT prep. That was my previous life. Nice. They invited me. My first experience with a whole animal cookout was at his house. So I do SAT prep with his son. And then they're like, hey, you are like an unrepentant carnivore. I'm like, yes, I am.
Absolutely.
And they're doing a pig roast. They're like, do you want to come for the pig roast? Do you want to come for the night before when we start the pig? I'm like, I mean, yeah. So I go to his house, and he's got this beautiful, front yard. At the time they were living in Berkeley, this huge dish kind of thing. And I watch and participate in doing this whole hog, and they do like this 24-hour roast. And I go home, I'm like, I could build that.
Right.
No, I could do that.
Totally.
It's so great.
Yes.
So I get a bunch of rebar and like scrap wood that I had sitting around my house. Anyway, the point is, I've had that pig roasting oven since I was like 28. My first pig roast was actually at my first kid's baby shower.
Nice.
Yeah. And like it worked. I'm like, oh my God, it worked. And I've since refined and gotten better and better. And we have our local farmer, our CSA, and we're actually going to do a pig roast dinner at the end of the season coming up in a few weeks. You deal, again, in a more classic manner with a whole animal, right? So producers of animals will bring them to you, and you take it literally from animal standing in front of you all the way to packaged and ready to go either to a marketplace or back to consumers of things of that nature. Talk to me about how you do this.
Yeah. So, and just like a key point there too is what we're doing is a little different from what most small processors are doing, in the fact that we are really not doing a lot of retail at all. We're not really doing wholesale. We're not buying animals. We're strictly doing the service. We're bringing the animal in for John's farm or Bob's farm or whoever, right? All these 300 different farms or more that we're doing. And turning around and giving it back to them and saying, hey, here's your product. Go direct to the consumer. Go direct to the marketplace. Put that package on a shelf at the co-op or at the farmer's market or wherever you're at.
So, for instance, McIntyre Pastures, we buy a lot of stuff from them, and we call it the carcass ferry, right? We leave this cooler out on the porch, and we wake up in the morning, and the carcass ferry has come, and there's like dead flesh.
Exactly.
But it's packaged, obviously frozen and vacuum sealed. So you are doing something like that, where McIntyre brings you the animal, then you turn it all around, package it, deliver it back to McIntyre, and then and I'm not saying they're your client,
and they are one of our clients.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Shout out Brad McIntyre.
There you go. And I know they've been on the podcast. But yeah, so they're bringing us the animal. We're that missing link, right? From the producer. The producer has the animal. You want the meat. Somebody has to get it into that format with the USDA inspection and all of those other things that have to go into making safe food, wholesome,
right.
All of the good foods, right? To get it to your front store so the ferry can sprinkle it on your doorstep, right? So that's what we do. And our company was founded by a group of producers, bison producers specifically, for that purpose. Our company's goal is to help small farms and ranches come to market, be able to leverage some of those things that larger companies would be able to do if you own your packing house or, have access to the machinery or the types of packaging, the types of labeling, but at an affordable way so that everybody kind of gets a level playing field when you're trying to market this meat, right? Like I said, we have, I think, over 350 different customers that we've done just this year. A Obviously, we have large commercial accounts that make up, maybe 10% of our business. And then a lot of it is just, I have 5 animals a year, 2 animals a year, however many it is that I want to take in a different route. And I want to give to my neighbors, to my consumers, to people that are interested in like local, like high-end agriculture.
Right. That's kind of like a closed loop, right? Like, where the earth was, where the cow ate the grass, then that cow gets delivered to you back to the place where it ate the grass and then distributed. So all of the money stays either with the farmer, with you, and the product stays with the consumer.
Right. And we, to be able to provide that service comparable to other companies that are doing different things, we eat our margin, we pay our guys a little higher. We really run on a pretty narrow margin to make sure that what we are doing is affordable, fair, it's equal for all producers, right? Just because Brad McIntyre does more animals than Jim doesn't mean that I should give a better price or, better scheduling or whatever to him if Jim wants to break into this market too. At least that's my philosophy.
Jim's going to have a hard enough time breaking into the market.
Exactly. Right. And that's what we don't want to be as a barrier to anybody coming into this industry. We want to help those producers come in and grow. And we've had people that outgrew us and off-boarded and went to larger facilities or went to facilities in Washington or in different parts of Idaho that were really scaled for 100 head at a time or 200 head at a time, which is way beyond what we're doing.
Okay. I got a lot of questions because I had a direct-to-consumer, rancher back in my former state. And, quite unfortunately, he fell off the wagon. I didn't know that, but like he was related to one of my students, and like he was like, "Oh, he's like my second uncle. He's an alcoholic." And I'm like, "Well, that's the end of that."
Yeah.
So I had him for a time, let me say, and part of that time was actually interesting because I realized there's an education aspect to this industry, and it's kind of like it's like a lot of industries. Like I have a cousin who's into blacksmithing, and he's this 20-year-old kid, and he's been blacksmithing because somebody took him to the Renaissance Fair when he was 11. And he was really taken by, these dudes swinging these hammers. And the old 65-year-old dudes or 70-year-old dudes swinging the hammers are realizing there are not a lot of people lining up to be blacksmiths and learn what we're doing, what we've done for 40 or 50 years. So they started teaching my cousin all of these, skills and taking him. He got a forge at like 15, like wild stuff, right? And now he's attained a level of skill at 20 that a lot of people decades older than him just don't have. And it's kind of like this dying industry and this dying knowledge base. And the meat processing and how you handle cuts and what cuts are popular, what cuts are sold, standard cuts at market, these are all changing things as well. The experience I had with my producer back in my former life, I really like flap steak. I'm a huge fan. The only place I've known to get flap steak is Costco, right? And again, I learned about this from somebody who used to work in the restaurant business as well. They're like, flap steak is like the dirty secret of all restaurants because it's so good, but it's named flap steak. And and everybody thinks flat iron, everybody thinks flank. It's like, no, flap. And it's great. But he didn't know it. And it took like months for me to essentially educate him on how to get his processor to get it out. And that's when I realized, like, oh, this is a really weird thing. Like there are portions of animals that people sell as like, like stew meat, right? Okay, well, what's stew meat? Where did it come from? Or like fajita meat. Like, okay, that's not a cut of the cow. Like, so essentially you just don't know what to do with this piece of meat. It doesn't have an articulated purpose. And now you're marketing it just as this general broad use meat. But in reality, there is a lot that goes into understanding which cuts are better for which types of cooking and which types of cooking Americans, or at least this area, prefer. And that's not in line with like every other part of the world. That's just what we've been reduced down to.
Right. And I think the flap steak in particular is, at least in my experience, it is a more commonly used Latin steak, right? When I say flap steak, my immigrant Hispanic employees are the ones that know. Oh yeah, that's flap steak. Yep. No, I know what that is, right? because it's very commonly used for fajitas and for
And
things
by the
like
way,
that.
I want to be clear. I get to make the fake Mexican accent
Right,
because
yeah,
I am
yeah.
Mexican.
Yeah.
So like, I get it.
great.
You don't get to
Yes.
do it. You didn't do it. Good job. But I get to do it.
Right. Yes. My Spanish is great.
Mine is terrible.
Right.
My dad, interesting cultural thing. It used to be in the 50s, if you were a Mexican immigrant, as my grandfather was,
speak English.
you taught your kids to speak English because you wanted them to assimilate quickly and you didn't want anybody to know more than the fact that like looks like a little Mexican kid running around
right.
that he's Mexican. So my dad grew up not speaking Spanish, and then it became valuable again in like the 80s and 90s to be bilingual, and I had to like take Spanish from like some trash, middle school Spanish teacher, and I was like, Dad, why didn't you tell me? And I was the youngest. My sibling was like, he doesn't know how to speak. Like she's like pigeon Spanish, but yeah. Anyway, I'm sure your Spanish is far superior to both mine and my dad's.
It's okay, but my family also, my great grandpa Bianchi had, they spoke Spanish in the house unless the great grandkids were around, right? And so there was a lot of Spanish around me growing up. My grandma on my mom's side actually taught. She taught like elementary school, but spent a lot of time teaching ESL in elementary schools, and so I spent a lot of time around Spanish growing up. So I just picked it up.
I'm sure. That's how we learn languages.
Anyway,
back to
absolutely.
so more in Latin American producers and processors understand like, oh yeah, flap steak, I can get it here. This is what
things from different countries, things that are more popular in different countries, like hanger steak. Hanger steak is super popular in the UK. Not something that we use a lot here. You might call it hanging tender or something like that. It's like a diaphragmatic muscle. You don't get it on every animal just based on like how animals grow. And, you only get one piece off of a whole animal, right? So it's not like a super common steak, but it gets used a lot in other countries. And then here it's coming back in popularity, but it takes a lot of work. You have to do a lot of trimming and stuff. So a lot of people don't like it. But that's. Are
you saying a lot of consumers don't like it, or processors don't like it?
Well, processors too, but it's not hard for processors. It's hard for consumers because it has a lot of like interstitial like connective tissue. Oh. So I use it. I actually cut it in for like kebabs or fajitas or something, and I'll go through and like trim it. But I go a little faster. Right? I grew up trimming meat, so it's not like I go a little faster than the standard consumer. But that kind of stuff, the hard thing with processors in general is that we've lost that knowledge in the trade of how to do all these different cuts and how to market these things. And for small processors, for the sake of speed or simplicity, you kind of over the years limit what you do, which is something that we've kind of undone over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been kind of leading the team over here. Is, hey, if they ask for it, we might have to charge them more for it, but we can probably do it. We got to figure out how to do these things, right? And give producers access to these different cuts that they can get better value out of, instead of just, oh, you can have chuck roast or we can grind it up, right? We can make fajitas, we can make Denver steaks, we can make this and this and this.
Wait, what's a Denver steak?
Denver steak is coming from your underblade on a chuck. It's okay. I mean, it's not like the greatest steak ever. It's a decent cut of meat. It's pretty tender, but it's another way to use it. So when you separate your chucks and you bone them out, and you're going to take your flat iron off, and then you can take this piece, that underblade piece off of that chuck, cut that into Denver steaks, and it leaves you with a small chuck, if anything. But if your only other option was chuck roast, then I mean, it's not a bad thing to have. Hey, look, I've got a steak.
I have a steak and a chuck roast.
Yeah. Or a small chuck roast. Or I can take this small chuck roast and cut it into like carne asada or Philly cheesesteak slices, or use it for fajitas, or use it for something else, or even throw it in the grinder. But I'm maximizing pieces and parts that I can pull off of it.
You're giving options, right?
Right.
Like you're adding, and the other aspect that you talked about is like you're bringing different value to a normal thing. And in the absence of the knowledge of how to parse things out and offer different options and different value sets, then it's just one size fits all, and nobody really benefits.
Well, and that's a factor of, I mean, it's partially a factor of industrialization, right? The meat industry industrialized in the, as early as the 1910s, 1920s. We had the big packing centers in Chicago, and they figured out that, if you de-skill your workforce, you can pay less and you aren't teaching them everything all the time. And so the grocery butchers were the ones that still had the skill, in the small shops like ours.
Sure.
Every town in America had like a grocery store or a butcher shop where you could go and get meat from somebody who was cutting it, breaking it on the carcass. Whereas the big industrial plants was, hey, Jim, your job is to cut this piece of meat, and that's the only cut you're going to do all day, every day. And then you're going to cut this piece of meat, the only thing. And that's how we still run these industrial plants, is you do one cut, you do one job over and over and over and over again, because that's how you get good at things. And that's how you get fast and efficient and better. What happened is we de-skilled the large facilities. And then in the like, as early as the 60s, 70s, we really solidified how to ship, not just on trains and being able to ship on, over the road with trucks and refrigeration, and then being able to parse out high value items. So say now Albertsons, instead of having to figure out how to sell a half a beef or a whole beef and market all of the different pieces to make sure they sell everything, they can say, oh, well, our best seller is ribeye, so I'm going to order 3 times as much ribeye, and I don't really need that much ground, right? I'll only take a case of ground or a case of New Yorks. But that's not how a whole animal works. And so once we started doing that, we de-skilled those grocery store butchers too, to the point where they open a box and they can cut it into steaks, or they can cut it into roasts or whatever. They can do the basic work once it's in the primal form, but they can't go from start to finish like we do. And that creates this challenge of, where does somebody go to learn it? Because you can't go to CS Beef to learn this. You can't go to Albertsons to learn this, right? It created a demand, a skill, and so we've seen our wages for the skilled labor positions, almost double in the last 5 years. But there's nobody coming in. We're not pipelining kids out of high school into meat cutting like we are welding and plumbing and electrical work, because it's always this kind of like, oh, yeah, we really don't need it. Or, oh, you can go do meat sciences, but you're not going to do meat sciences and then come back and do cutting meat on a table, right? So we have this technical skill that's really a technical job that nobody is coming into.
Man, there's so much here. And like specifically that it plays into, to some degree, the loss leaders within grocery stores. It plays into the mass differential between different cuts and how different things are treated. It also plays into how I and everybody has now grown up cooking because of the access to certain cuts and because of the access to certain styles of cooking. It's just like I have a friend. I mentioned my friend to you, right? And he's way into the idea of bringing beef tallow into a kitchen in a different form. If you want to go buy beef tallow, you can absolutely do it. I think you get it in jars and things like that. Yeah. And he loves beef tallow for cooking like eggs. He uses it like butter, but he's like, hey, look, I don't want to mess with butter, or he doesn't like butter as much. Beef tallow apparently is superior for some reason in his mind. Fine. His problem is like, people have beef tallow, but the beef tallow is not in the workflow of people's kitchens. He's like, when you want something analogous to butter, you go to a butter stick. Like people are used to sticks of things. So like in my house, we have that little, white ceramic thing, cut off, throw it in the pan. I'm not going to like I have ghee in my cabinet, but I'm not going up and like getting the can and like unscrewing it. Yeah, with a spoon.
Yeah, I can't believe it's not butter. Yes, you can, right?
Yeah,
right. That's the mentality, the thought process.
And because of that, he's recognizes like there's this hole in providing something to consumers that is a different product, right? Beef tallow instead of butter, but it's not being delivered in the shape and in way and quantity that people can fit it into their workflow. And their workflow, my workflow in the kitchen now, with presuming that there's a stick of butter here and there's like a little thing of salt and a pinch of salt, that workflow, that actually drives how I cook and what I cook, right? And what I cook with. So he's trying to fill that hole with like, let's give a stick of beef tallow to people so it is literally can just substitute in the exact same workflow as a stick of butter. And it's that broader picture that's like, oh, I only know how to cook like 5 things with beef, right? Or something like that. Because the demand for me to know how to cook different things has been reduced because the access to these different cuts has been reduced.
Right.
That's like, in essence, that's what it is. And as my capacity to cook different styles is reduced because supply is reduced, then that's a self-fulfilling prophecy with meat processors. Okay, well, let's reduce down further what we're offering people because they're not interested in this other stuff because they don't know how to cook it. But I don't know how to cook it because I didn't have access to it. And so then and now we're down to like 4 different cuts.
Right. We're down to the big cuts and the major things. And then, trying to educate people and producers on, well, these are your other options, right? Because producers are in the same boat. These guys that are raising the cattle are also going, well, okay, but what else can I do? I've got chuck roast, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. And that's what they know. And then you go, well, maybe let's do Denver steaks, or maybe let's do this or that or whatever. And they go, oh, yeah, because I've got way too many chuck roasts and I've got way too much burger.
Right.
So how do I get product that I can move, that people will buy, that I can sell for enough money to make money on it, and not just keep backstocking hamburger? Because 40 to 50% of your return on a whole animal, 40 to 50% of the packages that you get back are going to be burger. And so you've got to, if you want to keep having ribeyes in stock, you've got to keep selling burger over and over and over, or find other ways to sell it, right? Put it into sausage, put it into this, put it into that. And that's where the big companies and the corporations that are wholesaling, that's where they have that advantage. And that's why we are in this place that we are in our country, is they go, well, we've got all of this burger, we're going to sell it to McDonald's and whatever, and we're going to sell it at either a loss, or we're going to sell it at exact cost, and then we're going to mark everything else up.
Right, because what isn't it like only 15% of the animal comes out to be like the high valued steaks, or is it less than that?
It depends on the animal and yields. Like, there's so much science, and I'm not a meat scientist, but there's so much science that goes into animals and sizing and what you get. But generally, your steaks are going to account for between like 15 and 20% of your return. Your roasts are going to account for like 20 to 25%. You've got like 5% that's the kind of ancillary cuts, right? So that hanging tender, your tail, your offal, bones, that kind of stuff. And then the rest, that other 40 to 50%, is all burger or trim or stew meat, however you've marketed that product. But you've got a lot of extra that you've got to then sell. Like, oh yeah, I got to move all of that.
But when you talk about 15 to 20% of your return, that's literally, you're talking about return as in like mass of meat coming back
in the package.
But if you look at the 15 to 20% of the animal that accounts for your ribeyes, your New Yorks, your fillets, like all of these, sirloins, all of those things, that accounts for like 60% of the financial return, right? Mm-hmm. So it's this hyper valuable tiny segment of the animal that is the gold. It's like, this is where the money is, but in reality, you have this like other 50% of like, what are we going to do with the tongue? Like, is anybody making pate these days? Like, what are we going to do with the liver?
And that's what makes it hard for all of these producers. And that's where that education piece comes in, where we as processors should be educating the producers so they can in turn educate the consumer on, here's how to use all of this stuff and here's how to market all of this different stuff, so that more of it's getting used, right?
Right.
We used to go through things with wholesale accounts where one of our owners runs a bison ranch, Brown's Bison, over in Nissa. Been there for 30, 40 years. But they own the bison ranch, and they would go through these periods with restaurants or other wholesale outlets where they're like, oh, well, we only want strip loins. Well, then they've got piles and piles and piles of tenderloins because they keep selling all the strip loins. And so then we don't have T-bones to sell. All we have is tenderloins because somebody's taken all those, or flat irons, or whatever, right? If you aren't selling in a balance, then you're going to be constantly backstocked on some product that you then have to turn around and sell. And
that's when you get this mass imbalance in pricing, because then you're going to have to take a loss on this stuff, which means you're going to have to offset it over here. The other thing, it was right there. You were talking about, we were talking about price imbalance, money. Damn it, I had
percentages, educating producers.
Oh, yes, there it is. Yeah. Thank God. One thing that we really liked about McIntyre that immediately we're like, oh, I get this. Okay, great. a lot of the old school cuts, like liver and onions, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody knows how to make liver and onions anymore. I tried. Oh my God, this was so embarrassing.
Mm.
I go to Whole Foods. I was like 35, right? I go to Whole Foods. I'm like, I'm going to make liver. Like, so I ask them for liver and they literally do a double take. They're like, do you want liver steaks? I'm like, oh yeah, like hook it up. They're like, okay, like I'll get you some. And they come out with this giant hunk of liver and they get the bandsaw turned on. It's like,
right.
And I get this giant liver steak like
Right.
this. And I'm really excited because I know I'm going to
use it.
I'm going to
Oh, yeah.
crush it, right?
Oh, it's gonna be so
I
good.
go home and I get the onions and the garlic in the pan. Then I'm like, I'm going to make some liver. And I throw this thing in and I chop it up kind of like fajita style, throw it in. I made it through like half the plate. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I can't believe you got that far.
I was doing it in front of my wife too, and she was like, "You gonna eat that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's gonna be great." Most people don't get through the cooking process, and they go, "Oh, it smelled and it tasted funny." Right.
But my point is, and again, I have a point here. McIntyre, the reason I wanted to do it is because you find out that those old school cuts are really the most like you have the Liver King now. And this was before the Liver King, but you have these mass nutrient dense cuts that are just unpopular or like smell funny when you cook them, right? So what McIntyre offers is their organ blend ground beef, where it's like, God, you did it. You took the things that are nutrient dense, that are generally not popular sold, and you wove them into my workflow and helped me integrate them into hamburger meat. And we love smash burgers in my house. Like I got my wife a smash burger mallet for Christmas. It's fantastic. And we do these patties that are like this big and that thin, man. And it's like 90 seconds aside. You don't even you wave it over the flame and you
done.
get that crispy edge. But you have this incredible rich beef and organ flavor in the meat. And like my boys eat them up like it's going out of style. Like we'll literally go through 3-ish pounds of burger meat in one sitting. Just like boom, boom. They're all one. We make them double doubles because they're really thin patties. Exactly like
Animal
In-N-Out.
style.
Oh, thank God. Yes. Yeah. So integrating those cuts and educating the consumer about like, hey, this is actually going to work and it's going to be more nutrient dense and it's really good. That just giving that option, I have to imagine really alleviates like, well, we got this backstop of livers and organs that like we're never going to unload.
Yeah. So, and that's, we kind of talked about earlier about, you asked me about social media and how much I did, right? Yeah. And I told you that's how I spot trends. And about 2 years ago, one of the bison companies that sells online out of Texas, came out with this. I think they were calling it ancestral blend or something like that, which
the primal blend,
right?
The caveman blend.
Yeah. So they came out with that, and it hit the market.
It's a bro blend. That's
exactly.
what it's just the bros. It's some dudes with beards who are like.
And that was how it was marketed, right? It's bison. It's super high protein. It's got all your vitamins and minerals, right? It's like, oh, this is right? It's in the middle of like the caveman diet, the carnivore diet fads are going on, and so that came to market. And it was like slowly kind of picked up. And then over the last year and a half or so, it went like fire. Everybody all of a sudden is wanting to add this liver back into their ground beef. And so we talked to our producers about that. And we said, hey, this is a trend. This is what we're seeing. I think it'd be a good product. It's going to cost a little more to do it, but you've got all this backstock of stuff. Outside of that, what are you going to do with all of that liver? You might get one or two guys, but you're going to sell it for dog food, for pet treats, you're going to throw it away, right? You get, on a beef, you get like 15 to 20 pounds of liver on every single beef you do. And if you don't sell it or use it, it's just waste. It's gone, right? That's money you don't recoup.
Especially with those high quality animals that the liver was not stressed horribly from just eating trash. Like if you have some grass fed free range animal that gets nice and plumped up, that's been only had one bad day, just had one bad day.
Right.
Yeah.
And then on that producer education piece, we had some producers that are like, hey, I want to throw more organs in there. So let's throw the heart in there. Let's throw the kidneys in there. And they tried it, and then they came back to me and said, don't ever throw the kidneys in there again. It was like, oh, it was so bad. It smelled awful. And so when producers then asked, hey, can we do organ blend? I go, yes, but feedback has been, don't put the kidneys in there because it doesn't make, you're maybe like 5 or 6 pounds. You're not getting a lot of add, and it smells like, when you cook it, it smells like a kidney, right? A filter for urine. And so you don't want to, we're mixing it into ground beef to eliminate that problem of, oh, I stunk up the kitchen and my wife's not going to eat this. And then you add in kidneys and it's like, oh, well, I stunk up the kitchen and my wife's not going to eat this, right?
Right.
But so those little things are where we as a processor really fit in with our producers and say, okay, tell me your idea. Let's see what we can do. Here's what it takes. Here are some ideas that, trends I've seen, or, I have a guy that tried it and this was his result. We'll still do it for you, but I just want you to be, here's our recommendation, things like that. And that's really the bulk of my job is, right, educating and making sure that the business is running, but educating all of these producers and then their consumers and helping them with marketing and helping them with advertising to maximize the value, because I do want them to sell a whole beef every week or every other week. I don't want them sitting on 2,000 pounds of burger, because then they can't keep killing animals to get the ribeyes if they've got all this burger, right? And that's where most of these small mom and pop farms struggle, because they don't have access to like wholesale, right? Like CS Beef, they're going to wholesale out all of their burger to restaurants or whatever, and then have the premium cuts that they're selling at a different rate. Small, if you've got one beef that you're doing a month or a week or whatever, you've got to find that outlet. And if you don't have it, then you can't grow. But if you don't have enough for this restaurant to pick you up at a price that restaurant's willing to pay, then that's a barrier to entry. And that's where I think FARE and Tammy really can, is an exciting thing of kind of getting back in with that organization, is I think they can help bridge that gap between a small producer and a restaurant or someone that's wanting to do more quantity and say, hey, I'm looking to buy local. I want it to be, these are my specifications. And then going out and actually saying, hey, can you provide him 500 pounds a week? No. How much can you provide? 100 pounds? 50? Oh, you can do 50. Okay. Can you do 250? Great. Can you do, you're right. And get everybody together so that it's not one conglomerate processor or company that's buying everybody's stuff on this price, right, and then everybody else is sitting on product waiting for it to sell.
Right. Because lower connectivity in networking with and lower connection between producer, processor, and customer, the lower that and the worse that network is, the better it is for someone like Costco. And like nothing against Costco. Like
Costco's great.
Yeah, great. And like Winco and there's like employee owned and whatever, the whole thing, like that's fine. But if people actually want to have, direct from farm or something like that, or producers want direct to consumer and things of that nature, there has to be a way that we get out of the like boom and bust essentially with the animals, where you're making a mint on the fillet and then you're just suffering with 50% of the animal. And, again, if you have that threshold problem where it's like, hey, this restaurant or system, whatever, they need 500 a week. If you will never, the smaller processors will never survive if you don't have that connectivity. If you don't have somebody saying like, hey, you want 500, I can get you 500. I'm going to patch together with 7 people, but I'll get you the 500, and these 7 people will benefit from the contract with the 500. Right. And then the 500 gets locally grown, right? Whoever they're doing, they're like, okay, great. They get to put the stamp on like, that was Jim and that was Bessie. And like, come on. Well, probably not Jim. You don't eat the steers.
Oh, you eat steers.
Wait, there's a distinction
bowls, here. Right? So
wait, is it the same meat? I'm such an idiot. Listen, I'm sorry, Elliot.
You've got when we're talking about beef, right? You've got bulls, you've got steers, which are castrated bulls, you've got cows, and then you've got heifers, which are unbred cows.
Okay.
Typically, your steers and heifers are the ones that you see in slaughter. Your bulls and cows
are reproducing.
Cows, yeah. And then eventually that cow will probably get culled out. And if she's, under like 5 or 6 years old, you can use it for most of your cuts. If she's older than that, you're probably looking at a lot of burger. The bulls are the same way. Like there's an age distinction that they, that testosterone leans them out to a point that, it's not really like it gets tougher or it gets a different flavor.
Sure.
And so that's the other, like another piece for the producers to try to figure out is, okay, now I've got these cold cows. How do I market these animals? Because I can't just go take them to the sale. I'm not going to make anything on them. If I've got meat to sell, I can at least make some of my return on it. And then how do you market that? Because now you're getting a different set of product from that kind of animal versus your standard animals.
God, this is so interesting. So this is really the lifeblood of the local producer market. It's figuring out people, either direct to consumer or direct to restaurants or something like that. It's figuring out a way to remove the quantity barrier that being a small local producer you necessarily have to confront, and figuring out what to do with the other aspects of the animal that are for the big box stores just unnecessary, and they generally sell at a loss. Because Costco, one thing that surprised me about, like I get educated slowly because I'm an idiot, and people are like, no, loss leader. I'm like, I don't know what you're saying.
Right.
It's like, and years ago, finding out that, Costco sells its chicken at a loss, which is why when you buy chicken from, say, McIntyre, it's more expensive, but it's more expensive for very specific reasons. And not only does Costco not have as high quality, and nothing against Costco, but they don't have as high quality chicken, right? Like McIntyre's chicken follows around the cows and like scratch at the dung, and it's like, wow, man, crazy. By the way, it's the juiciest chicken.
Yeah,
like it is a different experience. Anyway, but not only that, Costco doesn't even sell at the actual cost of producing that lower grade chicken. They sell at a loss to get people into the stores and look at their TVs. It's like, what? Yeah. Like that is wild. Like how is an actual? I heard this thing about when I was in government in high school. This is like throwback. Throckmorton was my teacher. Gotcha. What a name, right? Yeah. So Dean Throckmorton. So Throckmorton was educating us about the inequalities and aspects of larger chain restaurants like McDonald's and other restaurants. And I remember they did this interview that we saw with this guy who was high up at McDonald's talking about how people really like chicken breast. And because they really like chicken breast, all of the meat producers in the country were like scrambling to fulfill McDonald's desire for chicken breast, right? But then they were selling the dark meat at a loss, which is crazy because I love dark meat, right? But right. Forget your chicken breast. So all of the dark meat is going at a loss, which is driving down the price, obviously. And so then like smaller meat producers are like, how are you guys selling this for so cheap? Like, this is insane. We can't possibly keep up with it, which only works to enlarge the industrial meat production because everybody wants the McChicken.
Right. Well, and to further, like you go further down that line, right? That's the economies of scale, right? Costco can buy a pallet of chicken cheaper than they can get 100 chickens from a local producer. Right. And then there's a lot of factors in going to Costco or Whole Foods or things like you have to carry a certain amount of insurance and you have to have all of these certifications as a processor or a producer or both, right? So there's a lot more cost in getting the foot in the door into those kind of places, which larger corporations have no problem with, right? Because it's, again, the economies of scale.
Right. If I make 10 cents off of a million pounds,
right? I still made 10.
Right, can make a lot of money.
Exactly.
Right.
And I can, if I'm doing 1 million pounds of chicken and they're all being done the same way, then I can buy a machine or I can automate this system that much better. And that's why a lot of smaller processors do limit the amount of cuts that you can take, or only have specific cut orders that producers are allowed to give them, because like the way we do it, we end up with, I would imagine, a higher rate of error than other producers.
How do you mean?
Or processors. Like a higher rate of, I bumped that.
Oh my God.
A higher rate of like, we cut your steaks to the wrong size, or, we picked the wrong piece for this, right? Sure. Just a higher, cut error, package error, something along those lines. But in our production flow for the day, we might be doing 15 beef, and each one of those beef might have 2 or 3 different cut orders, right? So each half, let's just, for the sake of ease, right? Say we're doing 15 beef and we're doing each half is a different cut order. That means we have 30 different cut orders that we're looking at for 15 beef, and it's going through in an 8-hour day as fast as we can get it through. So every variation, every added cut, every different piece that we're going to take off of that was different from the last one is a point of error, right? Somewhere where we can make a
potential
mistake.
Point, yeah.
Right.
Sure.
And it also, for us, makes it really hard to train. Like even if I get a kid in and I've got an apprentice or whatever we want to call him, right? When you're in like electrical or you're in welding or whatever, you're going to put that kid on one thing and you're going to do it until you know how to do it right. And then you go to the next thing and do it until you know it right. Education, I did some education when I was in the service, and it was, you teach it, show it, teach it, tell it, show it, have them do it, right? It was the steps through. But if you do every beef that comes down the line is a different cut, there's nowhere for you to take that kid and go, okay, we're going to cut ribeyes.
We're going to do 1,000 Denver steaks
exactly
today, and that's all you're going to do.
We might do a Denver steak Monday, and then we might not see another Denver steak for 3 weeks. So how do you train that? Because he's not going to remember 3 weeks from now because you only saw it once, right? And that's kind of some of the barrier that we have with our specific processing, because we're all doing it custom, because we're giving so many variation cuts, right? So many different specifications for our producers, which is great for them. They're able to, profit on that.
Yeah.
But it makes training hard. It makes education hard. It makes everything else harder to do it the right way. And it makes it more expensive.
A question for you.
Mm-hmm.
There is a resurgence of alternate cooking methods, bone broths, kind of do it yourself, like you're talking about, like the meat bros is just so funny, right? And it's just this big consumer trend to get back to, dealing with larger cuts, tougher cuts, more difficult things, not this precise, pretty, like little tiny steak. How annoying is that for you? Or is it kind of fun but also annoying?
It's fun, but it's also annoying. Usually we see these things as trends, right? So we've got, this YouTuber did what they're going to call like a Fred Flintstone steak or a caveman steak, and we had a customer request it. So I have to go watch this YouTube video to see exactly what that is, because that's not like a standard name, right?
The Fred Flintstone steak.
And what it ended up being was like you take the entire hind quarter of the animal and you separate out the loin, and then you've got your sirloin and your tri-tip, and everything is all still intact on the rump. And then you take that off of the rail. So this is like a 100-pound piece of leg or better. And you run that across the bandsaw as one giant, huge, massive steak, right? With a bunch of bones in it and weird stuff. And
hence the Fred Flintstone that looks like a giant baseball bat.
Well, so that's actually more like a tomahawk, but it looks like it looks like a giant steak with almost like a giant ham steak. And
that's what I'm saying. Like this conical. It's a conical thing with a bone coming through the middle.
So, and then you cut that into like ham steaks with the round bone in the middle. And that piece is, it's impossible to package because it's so big, right? You have to have like giant things. But then the video that I watched was 5 minutes of them cutting that steak and then them going, hey, I've never done this in my 25 years of butchery. And then another 10 minutes of them hawking whatever they're selling this week, right? Yeah. And so it's
which is the rub that you're supposed to put in between the cuts.
Or whatever. Yeah. And people see these on videos, or they see TikToks or YouTubes or whatever of all these different stuff. The tomahawk steak is another great example. That one's easier to do, but that's a bone-in ribeye with like this super long bone. And people are like, oh, that looks cool, right? It's great for Instagram. The Thor's hammer is the same thing.
It's great.
But then it creates this like, okay, now we have to figure out how to do that. It's hard to package. It takes longer to do them, right? And then everybody wants it. And it's like, well, is it even a feasible thing? Do you really want this, or do you just want to look cool on Instagram? And even when those are different things, a lot of times it is the tomahawk steak. It is that Flintstone steak, you lose your tri-tip, which is a huge seller for everybody, right? You lose your sirloin, you lose your bottom and top round is not a big loss. But like you're giving up things to make this cool like gimmick steak that nobody really wants.
How dare you?
Or make
my mouth is watering right now. Like I'm thinking if I could fit one of these in my pig roasting oven, it's like 100 pounds, you said?
Oh, I mean, the big one. Yeah, the huge thing is totally the whole leg. It's like a whole hind quarter.
This would be so like I'm just in love with this ridiculous, because the video I actually saw a video with a Fred Flintstone cut, and what they did is they had the conical meat stick essentially. Right. They sliced it horizontally and some vertically, and then they took a ton of time with their seasoning, right? And like squished it into everything, wrapped it up, and then they put it on a bucket loader.
Gotcha.
on a chain and dropped it into this pit. They made a big fire and kicked it out for the coals, dropped it in the pit, and just left it there all day. And they came back and it was dark, and they pulled it out of the pit. And then, of course, these guys like by hood lamp are like eating this, like
so good.
Oh, just all over his face, like right. And it's like, God, that does not look sanitary.
Right. But it looks delicious.
It looks delicious. And the funny thing is, in my journey doing whole hogs, I got educated and like, look, idiot, like not every cut of the pig is made for the same temp and same time. Right? Like that's the big thing. You're doing this for the production. You're not doing it because it's the best way to get the best meat. And like, yeah, you'll be able to wing it. Like it's going to be fine. But like I generally do a butterflied hog, and I rub brown sugar. Sometimes I pour Coca-Cola, brown sugar, and then pineapple. And then I have, like my proper smoker, not the box, not the Kachina, whatever, the one that's physically, very frequently people don't actually have pig smokers. They have ovens, right? So it's like a plywood box and you put the coals on top on a metal thing. That's not a smoker. You're not interacting with the heat or a smoke or anything like that. I have an actual smoker, which is really, really cool. But the point is, every time when I'm done, right, like I'll grab a leg, bone pulls right out. It's like 1,000,000 degrees too. So like I got to put gloves on and get my hands in there. And it's all like I'm burning the crap out of my fingers as I'm pulling it out. And then I got the big meat shredders, like the Wolverine shredders.
Yeah,
those are pretty good.
The claws.
Yeah, the claws. They're great.
Cool.
Those are great. But every single time you're like, all right, this is going to be fine. And like, we'll put the bourbon reduction sauce on it. No sweat. But what you really want is under that rib, right? And so like once I take out the hindquarters first, and then I get to the torso, and then it's like I reach down into the back and just pull out this mass of loin. It's like, this is it. This is what people really want. And I start handing those out, and they're like, oh my God, because it's been sitting in all the juice. It's super delicious. Then you get up to the shoulders and stuff, and it's tougher, but by that time, everybody's had a couple drinks and they're enjoying themselves, so nobody cares.
Well, and you know what's interesting? And slightly off topic, but talking about pork loin, I just was listening to a podcast on the way here, where they were talking about pork, and the guy who's a big pork guy, right? He's like, the loin, in like a wholesale market or in the general market, the loin is a loss leader for pork producers. They get so much more out of the ears and the shoulders, right? Because pulled pork and the thing, right? Hams, bacons, you get so much more out of that the loin is actually the lower seller. And that's going back to those old cuts, right? The bone-in pork chops and things like that. The only place you see those now is on the Denny's 55 and over menu, because that's where the only place people want a bone-in pork chop or a loin. You can go buy pork loins pre-seasoned at Albertsons for like $6 a loin, right? And this is that tenderloin. That's that primo piece that on a beef you're paying $30 for.
Right. And it's like, I didn't realize that's, even when I started, I didn't, I had to start interacting with all of the anatomy of the pig. I'm like, what is this? I remember the first time I did it, I'm like, what is this meat back here? Because I was, taking all the bones off and the rib cage off. And I was like, what is this? And I kept scooping, because it was this big, like the body cavity and all the skin. So it's kind of like gets into a mess in the middle of it. And I'm scooping out these giant, I'm like, is this a loin? Like, what the hell is that? I did not educate myself, but it is, again, I agree with you. If done correctly, like that's the premium piece that everybody wants, man.
Good.
Yeah.
So good. But that is a loss leader for the industry, because it just, consumers don't want it, or they don't value it the same way, right? Pork is an ancillary cut.
I think also, Brad brought up a really good point that the industrial grown hogs are leaner than the hogs he grows. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And when you think about the wear on the body that loin is, and how little fat you have on it. Always. And I think it's just really hard for people to cook and not feel like they're eating chalk. Like generally it gets overcooked, and there's, for the longest time, people considered pork done or not done. There was no like, do you want this medium or like well done? And now, some of the meat bros are like, no, like you can cook, you don't have to cook pork to 200 or whatever the hell. Like you don't have to scorch it, you can. So that allows for a little bit more juice in the pork. But in Brad's stuff, you have more subcutaneous fat. So you get a juicier experience when you're dealing with those more standard cuts. But I think they got butchered because, before after people started reducing the amount of fat, but before the slow cookers came on board, right? Because the slow cookers kind of like equalized everything.
Oh yeah,
They're
yeah,
like,
yeah.
doesn't matter what, just pour the liquid in, and 5 hours later you got something great.
Right.
Yeah.
And I actually learned that about cooking pork embarrassingly late. I'd been doing this like full time for like 2 years or 3 years, and I was doing a Wounded Warrior project. Had put on like a cooking class my wife and I went to, and at that cooking class where we did a pork, I don't remember, we did a loin or a shoulder.
Sure.
And the chef that's teaching the class goes, yeah, we're going to cook it to medium rare. I'm like, I don't think you should do that. And she's like, no, you can totally do that. There's no trick in the U.S. And sure enough, I go look, and it's like we eradicated trick in the 90s. And like you can cook pork to medium, but people don't know that. And that goes back to education and consumer education and producer education.
But the 90s is pretty close by.
The 90s is
That's
close
like
by.
we eliminated polio last year.
Right.
It's like, I'm still going to worry about polio.
Oh, no, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Especially when you have like a lot of imported products and things that are coming in from other states. But if you know where you're getting your meat, you way less concerned about biological issues, pathogens, worm, like that kind of stuff. If you know where your meat's coming from. If you don't know where your meat's coming from, proceed with caution, right?
Cook it to
for
done.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. But if you and think about like industrial production overall, right? Even if your beef isn't being imported from Brazil, think about like a factory in the United States. If you've ever worked a factory job or, an assembly line job of any means, we all know that there's some like, we got the job done as fast as we could or as good as we could, but something always gets by. So I always, when I'm like, if I go buy beef, which I hardly ever do, when I go buy hit the mic, man, every time I go buy a chunk of, the tube of meat because I need meat real quick.
Because I need meat.
Right. Because if I don't have to buy a tube of meat, I'm not going to do it because I can't see what's in there. I don't know where it came from. Right. But if I have to go buy the tube of meat for like a sauce or something, I go do it, but I cook the crap out of it because I don't know where that came from. I don't know. Right. I don't know what the quality standard was. Yeah, sure. They tested 1 out of every 3 2,000-pound pallets that went out of here might have got tested, or each pallet might have got tested, but they tested 2,000-pound tub and they just like dip some stuff out of the middle, not like, they're testing each lot, right?
Wait. You could have a 2,000-pound tub of flesh, and they just take essentially a spoon, and they're like, "We're gonna test this little chunk and see what's up."
Well, there's a lot that goes into how they do testing and like sampling sizes and things like that. But it essentially is like, here's this giant thing of grind or trim or whatever. And then you go through and you dip and you pull like 1 or 2 random samples out of that
and just check
thing and you check it. And if it's negative, the odds are the whole thing is negative. But you never know, right? I buy, dairy is a little different, but we bought half and half the other day. Doesn't expire until first or second week of October, and it wasn't good when I opened it, right? This morning, actually, I made a cup of tea, and I pour this half and half in it, and it's like
what are you,
chunks,
an aristocrat? You
right?
drank tea this
absolutely.
Morning?
Totally
What'd
a
you
tea
do?
guy.
English breakfast? Earl Grey?
Well, so I was supposed to be doing a vanilla chai was what I was making.
Okay.
Did not get that one. So I really like there's like a sweet and spicy that I think Bigelow makes. One of the tea, or Tazo. That's like orange and like oolong and like a black tea in there.
That actually sounds delicious.
Oh, it's delicious.
I love tea. You mess around with Harney and Sons?
A little bit. I've done those.
Dude, Harney and Sons. So I did SAT prep for almost 20 years, and I had this in my classroom. I had this gigantic pantry. It was a whole wall of all the trash that your parents will never buy for you. I would actually find out what kids' favorite snacks were, and I'd go get them from like the Smart and Final around the corner. Right. So like kids they would come to class just to do homework and eat snacks. So like, and parents were always like, what do you do in class? My kid wants to, they would come to extra classes just I'd be like, yeah, look, I got an extra seat. Come on in. And they'd like make cup of noodles and everything. But teas were always a thing. Cause I would get like dumb pre-mixed, like, here, you want a mocha or something. But I was like, you guys want some tea? They're like, no, dude, I don't drink tea. But Harney and Sons has an Earl Grey. Yeah. Okay. And it came in a bag. I'd open it. I was like, smell this. And they'd be like, oh, I'll have one of those. Oh. It's like, if you do tea right, and Harney and Sons nails it. It is so good.
The tea, like doing tea right is so hard. Yeah. So when I didn't really drink coffee growing up, we weren't a super coffee household in general. I got in the Army and then we were drinking coffee. But commercial coffee, like Folgers, Starbucks, whatever, right? It's roasted. It's almost burnt. It's all burnt because they want a consistent product. So Starbucks, I think Starbucks has come out and said, yeah, we obliterate our coffee.
Yeah, sure.
Starbucks always tastes burnt. So I'm like, nah, coffee's not great. Coffee's terrible. This coffee you made today, fantastic. I love it. So at that point, yeah, of course. At that point in my life, I'm like, I don't like coffee. Yeah, right. Energy drinks aren't really great for me. I drink them, but I probably shouldn't be hammering, 5 rock stars in a day in my 20s and go run, 10 miles.
You do a bang a day. It's not the same as drinking a black coffee.
Right.
And so bang, the R fuel,
the NOS. I think NOS was a big one back then.
My students used to bring that stuff in. It's like, what are you even drinking? And they'd be like tweaking. Not twerking. No, but they'd crack these like 24 ounces. I'm like, what are you consuming?
Just
just like twitching in the
for
class.
30 minutes. Yeah. So somebody wanted to go out on a date. We went to like a tea house and they like made the tea. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really good. Like, this is super good tea. So then I was doing some other stuff. I met a guy at a training event and he's like, oh, dude, I go and get tea at this place. And so he took me to and it was like at the mall, right? I think Starbucks owns it now. It used to be like Teavana or whatever. It was a chain. But they did fresh tea and like you brewed it and they had like how to brew it and what the temperature you brew tea at, depending on what type of tea, makes this huge difference. It's not like green tea. I hated green tea forever. And then I made it myself and I brewed it at the right temperature for the right amount of time. And it was delicious. And it's like, oh,
it doesn't taste like grass clippings.
It doesn't taste like grass clippings, but green tea gets bitter if you oversteep it and if you use it too hot. So if you just do boiling water,
190 or something, right?
Green tea is like 175 or 180. Like it's low. White tea is like 165. Like you bring that temp way down, which seems counterintuitive. But green tea, you go low temp for like 3 to 5 minutes maximum. Like 5 minutes is really pushing it, and then you start getting bitter. So you forget to take that tea out. You forget to pull the bag, whatever. Then it's crap, right? But like learning about tea and like learning all those things, and we'll bring it back to me, right? It's the same thing that I do today now. Is like, oh, why didn't I know this before? Why didn't anybody tell me that? Yeah, you're not supposed to make tea that way, or right. Real tea tastes good. Oh, these cuts of meat taste really good if you prepare them the right way, or this is how you're supposed to do this. Nobody tells you that. They just go, yeah, ribeye is the greatest one. Well, debatable, but it can be really good.
It depends.
Right. What are you doing?
When people say, there's this really interesting concept of like good. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's good? And the good can't exist in the abstract. Like saying this, it has to be good for something. It has to have good with respect to action. Like a good knife has a different function than a good pencil. Right? Both can be good, or like the weather is good. Well, good for what? Good for kite flying, or good for skiing, or good for sunbathing? Like these are different goods, right? And ribeye is good for something,
right?
But a chuck roast in the winter, back when I could drink beer with like a dark beer, oh my God. Like I actually had, for years, I was making chuck roast and like really getting into them. And one Christmas Eve, we had the whole family over, and I did 3 pots of chuck roast and did them and like, here it is Christmas Eve. Instead of doing this like schwanky, bone and ribeye or, standing with whatever, it was like we did this chuck roast and they're like, this is the best beef I've ever had. It was great. And we did a ravioli on the side. So we had this like great red, dark, hot meat. And then we had, little pasta plates and like, man, I'm really hungry now. Dude, this is great.
And I'll one up you on the chuck roast. So for my birthday, I always do something, right? Do something special, do something different. Like one year I took a whole ribeye and smoked it, right? Yes. Whatever. So this year, instead of doing something like that, right, I did bison hump roast, which is the very top of that chuck on the bison, right? The bison have that hump. So it's one of the fattiest parts of the bison because they store kind of like a camel. They're storing more of their energy up there. It's almost more consistent with like a beef brisket, where it's got this really good interstitial fat and it's got this super good fat layer. And then I did that with like a coffee bourbon rub overnight, put it in the crock pot with like 3 shots of bourbon and then all of my other stuff, cooked it for like 5 hours, and it was to die for. It was killer, and it falls apart. You can slice, like, it's just such a good cut. So, and bison doesn't shrink up as much. It's got, it's got a little bit of a sweet flavor to the meat versus like compared to beef, and it's usually a little more tender. So you get this tender fall apart thing that you can't get on a beef because they don't have a hump.
Stop. Listen to me. This is too much. You got to come back. We got to cook one of those.
Oh,
and we're gonna cook it. We're gonna put it right here. I'm gonna turn on the third camera so everybody can see it, and we're gonna eat this bad boy. Oh my God, it's so good.
They're so good.
This is back to the point. This is something that would be impossible in standard meat processing and consumption. Like, you're not getting a buffalo hump from Albertsons.
No. You're not getting a lot of buffalo from Albertsons. You get steaks, but you get these little tiny meat steaks that are coming from these big, massive, like, operations in South Dakota or Canada.
You can get bison, like burger meat.
Right, burger. And you can even get that at Costco right now. Like, it's off the shelf at Costco. But locally, if you go local, you can buy every cut of bison at our shop every day. Right, or you go to the Boise Farmers Market and buy it from Brown.
Do you personally have a shop where people can come?
So our butcher shop is primarily butcher, but we have a little
like
office,
a consumer,
and we have frozen packages, right? Because we freeze everything fresh to maintain freshness. But we have frozen packages. You can buy bison. We're working on getting some pork, some beef. Everything in there you can buy directly from us. Now, you pay a markup versus what you're going to pay to the producer themselves, right? You're always still going to be better off going direct to the producer. But
I know a guy named Elliot.
Exactly.
Who can hook it up.
Exactly. And if you need, like, if you don't want to buy a whole bison, or even, you don't want to go to Boise and buy bison there, you can come in Nampa. We're there all week, and I'm there on Saturdays, and buy one cut of meat and try it out. Right. Gosh, people come in all the time and they're like, oh, you guys only sell bison. I'm like, yes, but I sell everything. Oh, I didn't know you could get a ribeye off a bison. Yeah. Oh, well, is it lean? No. Look, here, it's marbled. It's leaner, yes. But you have marbling, you have fat. The fat's a little different, but you have fat. You have these humps. You have this, can you get a brisket? Yes. They're not great for smoking, though. I'm not going to sell you a brisket if you want to smoke it. If you want to make corned beef bison, you want to make a corned bison, the bison brisket is the best corned like beef and cabbage kind of thing. Yeah. So you got to pickle it, right? And so I had I did that like 5 years ago. I found a pickle recipe and I threw it in there. I pickled it for like 5 days, pulled it out, did cabbage and like corned beef and cabbage recipe, right? The best recipe I've ever had. The best thing because the meat has that sweetness to it. And you can get all of these different things, but you have to know, like with the bison or with the beef or with pork, you have to know, okay, this cut is best for this. And it may not translate from beef to bison, right? Bison, these cuts are better for that versus these cuts.
Elliot, listen, I can't take it anymore. My mouth is literally like everything. I have so many ideas. Listen, thank you for coming today. Thank you to FARE Idaho for connecting us and sponsoring this episode. I am so you got to come back. I have these visions of like once every couple months we have some gigantic atypical cut,
do something cool,
and we do the salt guy. Like
we'll
both wear white shirts and glasses, and we'll just do the salt thing, and then just dig on it because this is the type of stuff that I've wanted to know for a long time because you see classically in those kind of like the fancy, the guy who does the gigantic, he does like ostrich and stuff, and he's always staring at the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah,
and he's doing like these, and he has this crazy smile. But they do cuts. I'm like, what is that? Like, I don't even know what they're cooking.
Where do you get it?
Right, and anyway, I've wanted to do stuff like that for a long time. Not only do I not know what they're cooking, but I would not even know how to handle it if I got a hold of it. But you are my guy now.
I will be your guy.
We're gonna have this giant. Oh, it's gonna be incredible. I can't wait. Thank you again for coming, sir.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was great having you. Look forward to doing it again.
You just said it was great.
It was great having you. Yeah. I'm in charge now. I'm the guy. I'm going to get Godzilla behind me on the next one.
You sit here next time. It'll be great.
It'll be great. Yeah. No, thanks for having me. It's great. Look forward to.
Yeah. We'll do it again.
Yeah, for sure.